Dominic Falcone does not stop for anything. In 11 years, his driver Lenny has never once been asked to pull over for a stranger. Never for a red light if the intersection allowed it. Never for weather. Never for anything that did not have a name on a schedule and a reason written in an encrypted calendar that 3 people in the entire city had access to. Dominic moves through this world the way powerful men learn to move when they have been powerful long enough. Not quickly. Not loudly. With the particular stillness of someone who has arranged reality around him so completely that reality has stopped producing surprises. It is 5:47 on a Tuesday evening in February. The temperature has dropped to 11 degrees. The city outside the tinted windows is doing what cities do in winter, pulling inward, collapsing into itself, everyone moving with their heads down and their hands in their pockets and their eyes fixed on the ground directly in front of them. Nobody looks up in weather like this. Looking up costs heat. Lenny slows the car. Not for a light. The intersection ahead is clear. Not for traffic. The block is almost empty. He slows the car the way a person slows when something has registered in the peripheral vision before the conscious mind has caught up to it. A gradual, involuntary reduction in speed that he does not notice himself doing until the car is already almost stopped. Dominic looks up from the document on his phone. He follows Lenny's line of sight through the windshield. On the steps of the Delancey Street shelter, a woman is braiding a child's hair. She is sitting on the top step with the boy between her knees, her hands moving through his hair with a patience and a precision that have absolutely no business existing in a place that cold, on steps that hard, in a coat that worn. The boy is sitting perfectly still. Not the stillness of a child who has been told to sit still. The stillness of a child who has learned that stillness is how you survive the spaces between things. The shelter sign above them is half lit. One of the letters has been dark for weeks. The steps have not been salted and there is a thin glaze of ice along the edges that nobody has come to fix. And her hands keep moving. Patient. Precise. Completely present for this child in a place that has forgotten how to be present for anyone. Lenny does not speak. He reaches his right hand up and points. Just points. Through the windshield, at the steps, at the woman and the boy. Dominic is already looking. He has been looking for 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds something has happened to his composure that has not happened to it in longer than he can accurately measure. It is not dramatic. It is not visible on his face to anyone who does not know his face very well. But it is there. A tightening. A fracture along a line he forgot existed. Because he can see the boy's arm. Just below the left sleeve. A small dark mark, barely visible in the failing winter light, that Dominic Falcone recognizes immediately from a context he wishes he did not have to know. He is opening his own door before the car has fully stopped. In 11 years, Lenny has never seen him open his own door. He sits behind the wheel and watches his boss cross the street toward a woman who has no idea that the most dangerous man in the city has just noticed her son's arm. His hand is still raised from the pointing. He lowers it slowly. He watches. He thinks about all the times he drove down this block and kept his hands on the wheel and his eyes forward and told himself it was not his place. Tonight he pointed. He does not know yet whether that was enough. He will spend a long time figuring it out. Stay with me. Because what happens when Dominic Falcone reaches those steps will change 3 lives. And the reason he gets out of that car, the real reason, buried under 11 years of forward momentum and careful distance, is the thing that will change yours. Ayanna Brooks has been awake since 4:52 a.m. Not because she set an alarm. She stopped setting alarms 3 weeks into shelter life because alarms were a luxury of people who had something to wake up late for. The shelter lights in the hallway came on at 5 regardless, and the walls were thin enough that the sound of the overnight staff changing shift was its own alarm, predictable and reliable in the way that almost nothing else in her life had been reliable for the past 8 months. She was out of her cot and moving before the lights were fully on. This was important. The single power outlet in the family section of the second floor was shared between 6 units, and the unspoken rule, the rule nobody had written down but everyone understood and respected because respecting it was the difference between a charged phone and a dead one, was that the outlet belonged to whoever got there first. Ayanna always got there first. A charged phone was not a convenience. A charged phone was the difference between reaching Cairo's school and not reaching them. Between getting a call back from Sandra and missing it. Between knowing what was happening in the world outside these walls and being entirely cut off from it. She had learned, in the 8 months since the apartment on Fairfield Avenue was no longer an option, that the small logistical victories were the only kind available, and you pursued them with everything you had because everything you had was frequently not very much. She plugged in the phone, noted the time, calculated how long she had before Cairo woke up, and began doing what she did every morning while she waited. She organized. Not because there was much to organize. Their space in the family unit was a cot, a plastic storage container, and a shelf the previous occupant had left that was slightly crooked but functional. But organizing was the thing that told her brain it was morning, and morning meant forward, and forward meant one more day of working the problem. She arranged Cairo's things. She laid out his clothes for the day, checking for wear, replacing the socks that had gone thin at the heels with the last backup pair from the bottom of the storage container, and making a mental note to find a laundromat before the week was out. She was very good at mental notes. She kept track of everything because the alternative was losing track of something, and losing track of something could cascade in ways she could not afford. By the time Cairo stirred at 6:10, she had the day mapped. The shelter breakfast line opened at 6:30. The community center 3 blocks over had free Wi-Fi until noon. She had a call to make to Sandra's office at 9, her 4th attempt this week, which she would make standing in the community center lobby trying to sound calm and credible and persistent without sounding any of the things that got women like her filed under difficult and set to the bottom of the pile. She knew how she was perceived. She had learned it early and updated her understanding of it regularly. She knew that the version of persistent that was acceptable from her was narrower than the version available to other people. She knew that the space between credible and too much was smaller for her than the paperwork would ever acknowledge. So she stayed in that space. Every day. On purpose. With great and exhausting deliberateness. Cairo sat up. His hair had come loose while he slept, the braids from yesterday softened by sleep into something that needed attention. He rubbed his eyes and looked at her with the particular morning expression he had, not quite awake, not quite trusting the day yet, waiting for her to confirm that today was the same as other days and other days had been manageable. She held up the comb. He turned around without being asked and settled between her knees with the practiced ease of a child for whom this ritual is so established it requires no instruction. She began to part his hair. This was the thing she had decided she would not sacrifice. Not this. She had lost the apartment and the car and the job that paid enough to keep both of those things, and she had rearranged her entire sense of what was necessary and what was a luxury, and she had released things she had not expected to be able to release, and she had survived all of it. But she would not release this. Every morning, regardless of what the morning looked like, she braided Cairo's hair. She did it carefully, and she did it with her full attention, and she talked to him while she worked, not about the problem, not about the plan, not about Sandra or the reports or the mark on his arm that she was trying very hard not to think about before breakfast. She talked to him about regular things. What he had dreamed. What he wanted for breakfast from the shelter menu, which was a choice between 2 options but still a choice. What he thought clouds were made of this week, because his theory had been evolving and she kept up with it. She talked to him like a child who had a future she was certain about. Even when she was not certain. Especially then. This was not denial. This was a decision. She had noticed the mark on his arm 4 days after it appeared. She had noticed it the way she noticed everything about Cairo, completely and immediately, because noticing everything about Cairo was both her job and her entire reason for functioning. She had recognized it from a different context, a childhood context, a growing up in the kind of neighborhood where you learned what certain marks meant the way you learned traffic lights, not in school, just by surviving long enough to understand the patterns. She knew what it meant. She knew who used it and why, and what the presence of it on her 5-year-old son's arm in the vicinity of a city shelter suggested about who had been paying attention to their comings and goings. She had gone directly to the shelter coordinator. Then to the intake office. Then she had filed an official report with the city social services system and been told her caseworker would follow up within 48 hours. That had been Sandra. Sandra had called once in the first week and then rescheduled the follow-up and then cancelled and then gone quiet for 11 days. Ayanna had called back 4 times. She was preparing to call back a 5th time. She was doing this while also working a part-time shift at a grocery 3 blocks from the shelter, which she had found in the 2nd week when she understood that shelter resources were a ceiling rather than a floor, while also managing Cairo's school enrollment, which required documents she had to request and then re-request and then appear in person to collect, while also maintaining the spreadsheet on her phone where she tracked every expense and every resource and every contact name, because if she stopped tracking it would become unmanageable, and if it became unmanageable she would not be able to fix it, and fixing it was the only option available. She was doing all of this with steady hands. Because Cairo was watching. And what Cairo saw was what he would know was possible. She finished the last braid and tied it off. He turned around and looked at her with those serious dark eyes, and she looked back at him and thought for the 10,000th time that there was nothing in this world she would not do for this child. Nothing. She kissed his forehead. He wrinkled his nose, which was what he did when he was pleased but did not want to admit it. She stood up, rolled her shoulders, looked at the day in front of her and decided it was manageable. She was still deciding this on the shelter steps at 5:47 p.m. when the black car slowed down across the street and a man she had never seen before opened his own door and started walking toward her. Dominic crosses the street without looking for traffic. This is not arrogance. He is simply not thinking about traffic. He is thinking about the mark. About the distance between the car and the steps. About the fact that he does not have a plan and has not had a plan since the moment Lenny's hand went up and he looked through the windshield and saw what he saw, and the absence of a plan is producing a sensation in his chest that he has not experienced in so long he has to search for the word for it. Exposed. That is the word. He reaches the bottom of the steps and stops. Close enough to see clearly. Far enough that he has not yet committed to the approach. This is instinct, the instinct of a man who has spent his adult life reading rooms before entering them, calibrating the temperature of a space before allowing his presence to alter it. He reads this space. The woman has looked up. She is not startled and she is not performing calm. She is simply looking at him with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who has learned to evaluate situations accurately and quickly because inaccurate evaluation has consequences she cannot afford. She pulls the boy slightly closer. One arm. Subtle. Not a dramatic protective gesture. Just a quiet repositioning that says I see you and I am making a small adjustment accordingly. She does not know who he is. She is responding to what he represents, a man, expensive coat, unknown purpose, too much focused attention on her child. Dominic sees the movement and feels something he was not prepared to feel. Shame. Not guilt. Shame. The specific, older, more complicated version of the feeling that is not about what you have done but about what you have become, and the distance between who you are and who the person in front of you reasonably has cause to be afraid of. He has made people afraid his entire adult life. He has required it. He has cultivated it the way a garden is cultivated, deliberately, specifically, with attention to what produces the most reliable results. Fear is efficient. Fear is a language everyone speaks. Fear is the operating system his world runs on, and he has never had reason to examine whether that was a cost or simply a condition. He is examining it now. Standing at the bottom of a shelter staircase in 11-degree weather with a woman pulling her son closer because Dominic Falcone has walked toward her. He crouches down. He does not decide to do this. His knees bend and he is at eye level with the boy, and it is done before he has processed the decision. He has crouched down to eye level with a child because something in him remembered, from a very long time ago, that this is what you do when you need a child to understand you are not a threat. Dominic Falcone has never in his professional life needed anyone to understand he was not a threat. The boy looks at him. He is around 5 years old. Small, careful, still. He has the watchful quality that children develop when they have spent enough time in environments that require alertness. His eyes are not afraid. They are assessing. Taking in the coat, the posture, the distance from his mother, the expression on the man's face, running the calculation in the way that children calculate danger when they have been given enough data points to build the model. He decides something. Dominic can see it happen. A small settling, a fractional reduction in the tension around the boy's eyes. Not trust. Just a preliminary verdict of probably not immediately dangerous. The kind of verdict a 5-year-old delivers when they are very used to making it. It breaks something open in Dominic's chest that he was not ready for. He looks at the arm. The mark is small. Deliberate. Placed where it would be covered by a sleeve in most circumstances and visible only in the specific combination of light and angle and someone who knew to look. Someone who knew what to look for. He looks back at the boy's face. The boy looks back at him, steady and patient and waiting to see what the man is going to do next. Dominic looks up at the mother. She has not moved. She is watching him with the contained wariness of someone who has her alarm system calibrated to a hair trigger and is currently deciding whether the threshold has been crossed. He says, quietly, "I'm not here to cause you any trouble." She says, "Okay." She does not say she believes him. She says okay because okay is a holding position. Because okay means I am listening and I have not yet decided, and you have approximately the next 90 seconds to give me information that adjusts my assessment. He says, "The mark on your son's arm. How long has it been there?" The change in her expression is immediate and complex. Not fear. Something harder than fear. The look of a person who has been trying to be taken seriously about a specific thing for long enough that being asked about it directly and without preamble produces an almost physical reaction, relief and anger and exhaustion arriving simultaneously. She looks at him for a long moment. She is deciding whether he is someone she can afford to tell the truth to. She decides. She says, "Sit down. I'll tell you from the beginning." He sits on the shelter steps. In his coat that cost more than a month of her grocery budget. On steps that haven't been salted. In 11-degree weather. He sits down and he listens. She does not start with the mark. She starts 6 weeks before the mark, because 6 weeks before the mark is when she first noticed the man. She describes him the way she describes everything, precisely and without embellishment. Mid-40s. Medium build. He had been in the shelter common area twice in 1 week, which was unusual because the shelter had a strict visitor policy that required sign-in and verification, which meant he had been signed in and verified by someone who worked there. He had sat in the common area both times with a coffee and a newspaper, and he had not spoken to anyone, and he had looked at Cairo for slightly too long on the second visit in a way that she could not have put into a police report because there were no words for it that would have sounded like anything other than a nervous mother's unfounded concern. She had noticed. She had filed the noticing away. She had started watching the entrance more carefully. Then the mark appeared. She tells Dominic about the first report. The intake office. The woman behind the desk who typed while Ayanna talked and then told her that the shelter had protocols and that her concern had been logged and that a caseworker would be in touch. She tells him about the second report, the official one, filed through the city's social services portal on her phone in the community center lobby, her fingers cold because the heat in the community center was set for the volunteers and not for the people who came there to use the Wi-Fi. She tells him about Sandra. She tells him about the first callback and the follow-up appointment and the rescheduled follow-up appointment and the cancelled rescheduled follow-up appointment and the 11 days of silence and the 4 unreturned calls. She tells him about the shelter coordinator, Marcus Webb, who had listened to her describe the man with the newspaper with the careful tolerant expression of a person managing someone else's anxiety and had told her that she was understandably stressed, which was both true and entirely irrelevant, and that the shelter had a strong visitor policy and that she should feel safe. She had said, "I don't feel safe." He had said, "I understand. We'll keep an eye out." Nobody had kept an eye out. Or if they had not found anything worth reporting back about. She tells Dominic all of this in the flat, rehearsed cadence of someone who has said it before to people who did not hear it and has adjusted the delivery accordingly. She is not crying. She is past crying about this particular thing. She is in the long specific exhaustion of someone who has been doing everything right and getting the same result and has had to find a way to continue anyway because stopping is not an option when you have a 5-year-old who sits between your knees every morning and trusts you completely. When she finishes, Dominic is quiet. Not the quiet of disinterest. She has encountered enough disinterest to recognize its texture, and this is not it. This is the quiet of someone doing something complex internally that does not show on the surface. His hands are resting on his knees and he is looking at the street in front of him and he is somewhere that is not entirely here. Then he says, "The man with the newspaper. Can you describe what he was wearing?" She describes it. The coat, the specific shade, the shoes, the ring on his right hand, the newspaper he was not actually reading. Dominic is still for a moment. Then he says, "And the mark. Has it changed? Faded?" She says, "It's the same. I've been keeping it covered. I didn't want anyone to know he had it." He turns to look at her then. Direct and level. He says, "Why not?" She holds his gaze. She says, "Because I didn't know who was watching. I still don't." He looks at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifts in a way she cannot fully read but which feels, inexplicably, like respect. He stands up. He takes out his phone. He holds up one finger, which means wait or means give me a moment, and she waits because she has been waiting for 6 weeks and one more moment is entirely manageable. He makes a call. He turns slightly away but she can hear fragments. A name. A location. A question delivered in a tone that makes the question sound like a statement and the statement sound like a conclusion. He ends the call. He makes a second one. This one is shorter. 2 sentences. He turns back to her. He says, "I need you to stay here for the next few hours. Don't take Cairo anywhere without telling me first." She says, "Telling you." She says it flatly, because she does not know him and she does not take instructions from men she does not know, and he should understand that immediately. He looks at her. He says, "My name is Dominic Falcone. I'm going to need you to trust me for approximately 72 hours. After that you can decide however you want about whether that was a mistake." She looks at him for a long time. She thinks about Sandra. About Marcus Webb. About the visitor policy and the strong protocols and the callback that never came. She says, 72 hours. He says, yes. She says, and then I decide. He says, and then you decide. She looks at her son, who has been sitting quietly through all of this with the serious attention of a child who understands he is not supposed to interrupt. She looks back at Dominic Falcone, a man she does not know, standing on shelter steps in an expensive coat having just made 2 phone calls in under 4 minutes about her son's arm. She says, "Okay." He nods once. He turns. He walks back toward the car. Cairo watches him go. Then he looks up at his mother. He says, "Is he a good man?" Ayanna is quiet for a moment. She says, "I don't know yet, baby." Cairo thinks about this. He says, "He listened, though." She looks down at her son. She says, yeah. He did. She pulls him close and holds him in the failing winter light and thinks that listening, right now, might be the closest thing to good that the situation can produce. Lenny Hayes has been watching from the car for 19 minutes. He knows it is 19 minutes because he has been watching the clock on the dashboard with the automatic attention of a man whose entire professional existence is organized around time. Arrival times, departure times, the gap between a meeting ending and the next one beginning, the exact number of minutes it takes to get from any point in the city to any other point depending on the day and the hour and the weather. He has been Dominic Falcone's driver for 11 years. Before that he drove for the man who ran the North Side before Dominic reorganized it. Before that he was in logistics, which in his world meant something more comprehensive than the word suggests. He has spent his adult life in the background of rooms where significant things happened, which means he has spent his adult life learning to read significant things from the background. He watched Dominic cross the street. He watched him stop at the bottom of the steps. He watched him crouch down and then sit down on unsalted steps in a coat that cost a month of Lenny's salary. He watched the woman talk for a long time and Dominic listen for a long time and then Dominic make 2 phone calls and say something that made the woman look at him the way people look at something when they are deciding whether to believe it. He watched her decide to believe it. Now he is watching Dominic walk back toward the car and thinking about something he has not thought about in a long time. There is a shelter on Mercer Street. Not the Delancey shelter. A different one, 6 blocks east, older, larger, with a loading dock on the south side that Lenny drove past twice a week for 4 years because the route to the north side distribution point ran that way before they changed the routes. He drove past it twice a week for 4 years. In those 4 years he saw a lot of things on the steps and the sidewalk outside it. Families in the process of arriving. Families in the process of leaving. People waiting for things and people who had stopped waiting. A woman, one specific woman, in the first winter, who had 2 boys with her, a coat not unlike Ayanna's, and the same particular quality of contained forward-facing determination that he had just spent 19 minutes watching through his windshield. He had driven past. Both times a week. For 4 years. He had told himself that gone meant housed because the alternative was something he was not prepared to maintain alongside a job that required emotional efficiency. He does not know what happened to the woman on the Mercer Street steps. He never looked. He has not thought about her in a long time because thinking about her required him to examine a decision he had made without quite deciding it, the decision to make himself part of the infrastructure of a world that moved past people on shelter steps. And that examination was not something his daily life had previously demanded. He is thinking about her now. Dominic gets in the car. He does not look at Lenny. He sits for a moment in silence, which is unusual. Dominic's silences are usually working silences, the silence of internal computation, ledgers being balanced, problems being solved. This silence has a different quality. This one is sitting in something. Then he says 3 names. 2 of them Lenny recognizes from the organizational structure of a network that operates in the Southern Shelter Corridor. The 3rd name is the coordinator at Delancey Street. He delivers 4 separate instructions in the specific tone that Lenny has learned means the outcome is already determined and what follows is the work of confirming it. Then he is quiet again. Lenny starts the car. He pulls away from the curb slowly. After 2 blocks he says, without turning his head, I should have said something sooner. Not tonight. Before. The other times I drove past. Dominic says nothing for a moment. Then, you pointed tonight. Lenny says, almost didn't. Dominic says, but you did. Lenny drives. He thinks about the woman on the Mercer Street steps. He thinks about the pointing, the 19 seconds between seeing Ayanna and raising his hand, the 19 seconds in which he ran the familiar calculation of whether this was his place and whether it would change anything and whether the cost of inserting himself into something was justified. He thinks about what would have happened if his hand had stayed on the wheel. He says, you did right, getting out. Dominic says nothing. He is looking out the window at the city passing in the dark. Lenny thinks, some things you drive past and you know immediately that you will spend years thinking about them. Some things you drive past and don't know it yet. The trick, the thing he has not yet figured out, is telling the difference before you are already past them. Tonight he told the difference. Barely. At the last possible second. But he told it. He keeps driving. He does not know whether that is enough. He suspects he will spend a long time working out the answer. He suspects the answer will not be clean. He is, for the first time in 11 years, okay with that. Sandra Marsh has been a city caseworker for 17 years. She still has the letter of intent she submitted with her original application. It is in a folder in the bottom drawer of her desk at home, not her work desk, her home desk, and she has not read it since year 6 when she came across it during a move and opened it and read the first paragraph and put it back in the folder and closed the drawer and did not open the drawer again for a long time. She was 26 when she wrote it. She wrote things in it like systemic change and the dignity of every family and building something sustainable from the ground up. She wrote them because she meant them. She meant them for a long time. The system she works in processes 64 cases a month. The system was designed for 40. The difference between 64 and 40 is not a number. It is a decision that gets made somewhere above Sandra's level about what constitutes adequate funding and what constitutes an acceptable caseload, and that decision filters down to Sandra's desk as a stack of files and a calendar that has not had a free afternoon in it since 2019. She is not a villain. This is important. She is a person who went into a broken system with good intentions and has spent 17 years learning to survive it by making accommodations that she tracks the cost of only when she has the energy to track costs, which is less and less frequently as the years accumulate. The accommodation she made with Ayanna Brooks's file was a familiar one. She had reviewed the initial report, flagged it as requiring follow-up, made the first call, scheduled the appointment. Then the week had happened. Not a dramatic week. Just a week with 63 other files in it and a rescheduling request from a different family and a court date for a third case that required 4 hours of documentation she had not anticipated. The follow-up appointment had moved. Then moved again. Then the callback request sat in her queue for 11 days and she had looked at it twice and both times something more immediately urgent had pulled her attention away before she could act on it. She had not forgotten Ayanna Brooks. She had deprioritized her. In a system that runs at 64 cases against a 40-case design, deprioritization is not negligence. It is triage. It is the thing you do when everything is urgent and you have to choose. She has been telling herself this for 17 years. She is very good at it. She is so good at it that it has become a reflex rather than a conscious decision, which means she has stopped examining it with the frequency that examining it would require. She is at her desk at 6:23 p.m. on a Tuesday, 40 minutes past the end of her official shift, working through the documentation backlog, when her direct line rings. Not her office line. Her direct line. The number that is not listed and is not given out to families and is known to a very short list of people who exist in the specific organizational territory adjacent to her department. She answers. The man on the other end identifies himself. She knows the name. Everyone in her department knows the name. It exists in a category of names that you learn early in city work. The category of people and entities that occupy the layer of reality that runs parallel to the official one and which the official one pretends not to know about while depending on entirely. He does not raise his voice. He does not make threats. He simply explains, in a quiet and entirely precise manner, that he is aware of the report filed by Ayanna Brooks 6 weeks ago, that he is aware of the follow-up history, that he is aware of the current status of the file, and that he would consider it a professional courtesy if Sandra would review the file this evening and treat it with the urgency that its contents, properly read, would indicate it deserves. He says, I understand you carry a significant caseload. This one should move to the top of it. There is a pause. He says, tonight. She opens the file before he has finished the call. She reads it properly for the first time. All of it. The intake notes, the original report, the description of the mark, the description of the man with the newspaper, the follow-up requests, her own logged notes from the first callback. She reads it and she sits very still for a moment at her desk. She thinks about the letter of intent in the bottom drawer at home. She thinks about the first paragraph she has not reread since year 6. She picks up her phone and calls Ayanna Brooks directly. Ayanna answers on the second ring. Sandra says, Ms. Brooks. This is Sandra Marsh. I am so sorry it took me this long to call you back. I need you to tell me everything from the beginning and I am going to listen to every word of it. I have as much time as you need. There is a silence on the line. The kind of silence that follows something a person has been waiting to hear for 6 weeks and is not entirely sure they can trust yet. Then Ayanna says, okay. She starts from the beginning. Sandra listens. She does not type while Ayanna talks. She turns her chair away from her computer and holds the phone with both hands and listens. All the way through. Without redirecting or summarizing or moving toward the next procedural step before the story is finished. When it is over she says, I hear you. I believe you. Here is exactly what I am going to do tonight, and here is what will happen tomorrow morning, and here is my personal cell number which I want you to use if anything changes before then. She stays at her desk until 10:47 p.m. When she finally locks up and walks to her car, she sits in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting the engine. She thinks about 64 cases and 40 slots and the arithmetic of a system that was not designed to hold everything it has been asked to hold. She thinks about what it cost Ayanna Brooks for that arithmetic to not be her problem. She drives home. She sits at her home desk for a long time. She opens the bottom drawer. She takes out the folder. She reads the letter of intent from the beginning. Marcus Webb has been running the Delancey Street shelter for 8 years. He is not a cruel man. This also needs to be said clearly because the story of what Marcus Webb did and did not do is more useful as a story about systems and calculations than as a story about cruelty. Cruelty would be simpler. Cruelty has a clear shape and a clear cause and a clear solution. Marcus's failure has none of those things. He genuinely believed, in his first years at Delancey, that he was doing important work. He believed it with enough conviction to sustain him through the funding cuts and the staff shortages and the facility maintenance backlog that was now 3 years long and included, among other items, the salting of the exterior steps and the repair of the letter on the shelter sign that had been dark for 6 weeks. He had learned, in 8 years, to manage the gap between what the shelter was supposed to be and what the shelter actually was by developing a comprehensive understanding of what could be acknowledged and what, if acknowledged, would create problems that the shelter's liability coverage and operational capacity could not contain. He had learned which complaints were process complaints and which were threat complaints and which were the complaints of people who were understandably overwhelmed and needed to be heard and validated and redirected toward the official channels that would absorb them, without requiring Marcus to do anything that would generate documentation he was not prepared to have generated. When Ayanna Brooks came to him 6 weeks ago and described the man with the newspaper, Marcus had listened. He had genuinely listened. He had also, while listening, performed the familiar assessment. Family under stress. Child in unfamiliar environment. Mother displaying heightened protective response consistent with the anxiety profile common in families in transitional housing. He had told her she was understandably stressed. He had told her the shelter had a strong visitor policy. He had told her she should feel safe. He had done these things because they were available to him and because the alternative, taking her concerns seriously and investigating it and documenting the investigation, would have required him to look at the sign-in logs for the common area and to find the name attached to the visitor who had been there twice in 1 week and to follow that name into a part of the organizational landscape that Marcus had spent 8 years carefully not looking at. He knew, in the way that people in his position always know things they cannot afford to officially know, that the shelter's funding structure included contributions from sources that did not bear close examination. He had not examined them. Examining them was not his job. His job was to keep the shelter operational, and the shelter's continued operation was a good thing because the families who had no other options needed it to remain operational, and that logic had been sufficient for 8 years. He had told Ayanna Brooks she should feel safe, and then he had walked back to his office and not thought about it again for 6 weeks. Until Tuesday evening, when 2 men in good coats arrived at his office at 7:15 p.m. They were calm. They did not raise their voices. They sat across from his desk and placed in front of him a very thorough and very clearly organized summary of certain sign-in records, certain funding documents, certain communications between his operational accounts and accounts belonging to the network that used Cairo Brooks's arm as a kind of inventory tag. They told him, in the same quiet and entirely precise manner, what was going to happen next. Marcus Webb did not go home that night. He sat in his office until the audit team arrived the next morning. He answered every question. He signed every document placed in front of him. He did these things not because he was asked nicely but because the alternative had been explained to him with a specificity that left no room for negotiation. By Thursday morning the shelter had interim management. The audit that followed found 14 other families whose reports had been similarly processed, filed and deprioritized and absorbed by the official channels the way that water absorbs into sand, completely and without trace. The 14 families were contacted. Their cases were reopened. Their reports were treated as if they had been taken seriously from the beginning, which was the least that could be done and the only thing that could be done now, and which was entirely insufficient and entirely necessary at the same time. Marcus Webb did not return to the shelter. He did not return to social services work in any capacity. This is the most the story can say about his outcome without saying things that cannot be said in the kind of way this story is being told. He is, by all accounts, understandably stressed. It is 9:43 p.m. and the work is done for tonight. The calls have been made and the documents are moving, and the people who needed to receive information have received it, and the people who needed to understand certain things about their continued professional futures have understood them. Dominic is in the car. Lenny is driving. The city is quieter at this hour, the streets half empty, the lights of late restaurants and convenience stores doing their slow orange work against the dark. They have been driving in silence for 11 minutes when Lenny says, "Can I ask you something?" Dominic says, "When have I stopped you?" Lenny says, "We've driven past hard things before. You and me, in this car, for 11 years. We've both seen things. I've seen you see them and keep going." He pauses. The car moves through an intersection. He says, "Why this one?" The question sits in the car. Dominic looks out the window. A block passes. Then 2. Lenny says, "You don't have to answer." Dominic says, "No." Another block. Then he says, "I grew up 3 blocks from a shelter like Delancey." He says it the way he says things he has not said before. Flatly, precisely, without inflection that would invite the listener to attach significance to it. He says, "My mother worked 2 jobs. Sometimes 3. On the nights she worked the 3rd one she would come in after I was asleep. I never heard her come in. But in the morning my hair would be braided." He does not look at Lenny. He is looking at the street. He says, "She'd sit with me while I slept and braid my hair so that when I woke up and she wasn't there I would know she had been. So that I would know she had chosen to be there even on the nights she didn't have enough hours left to be there when I woke up." Lenny does not say anything. He keeps his eyes on the road. Dominic says, "She died when I was 9. After that I stopped letting anyone be careful with me. I decided that being careful with someone was the thing that made losing them unbearable, so I would not let anyone do it. I have been very consistent about that for a very long time." He is quiet for a moment. He says, "Tonight I looked through a windshield and I saw a woman being careful with her son on the steps of a shelter in 11-degree weather, and something broke open that I had been keeping closed for 30 years. And I got out of the car before I could decide not to." He turns to look out his window. His reflection looks back at him from the dark glass. He says, "I don't know if that's a reason. I don't know if it's enough of one. I know that those children are safer tonight than they were this morning, and that the people who treated that woman like she was nobody worth listening to are going to spend a long time reckoning with that decision." He says, "And I know that my mother used to hum while she braided. I haven't thought about that in 26 years, and tonight I thought about it standing on shelter steps with a stranger, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I just stood there and let it be there." He does not say anything else. Lenny drives. He is not going to respond to this. He understands, with the instinct of someone who has spent 11 years reading the temperature of this particular man's silences, that a response is not what this moment requires. What it requires is exactly what it has. Two men in a car at night, one of them having said something true for the first time in a very long time, and the other one simply being present for it without making it into more than it is. After 4 blocks, Lenny says, "She sounds like she was something." Dominic says, "She was everything." They drive the rest of the way home in silence. It is a different kind of silence than the silences they usually share. Not the silence of efficiency. The silence of two people who have been somewhere together and have not yet found the words for what it was and have decided, provisionally, that the absence of words is acceptable. Some things do not need to be named to be real. The car pulls through the gate. Dominic gets out. He stops. He stands for a moment in the cold outside the car, not moving toward the door, his face turned slightly upward. Then he goes inside. Lenny sits in the car for a few minutes after the gate closes. He thinks about Dominic's mother, a woman he never knew, sitting in the dark braiding her sleeping son's hair on the nights she did not have enough hours left for anything else. He thinks about what it costs to be that careful with someone. He thinks about what it costs a child to grow up knowing he was worth that kind of care and then lose the person who gave it to him. He thinks about what it costs a man to spend 30 years deciding he was done being careful with people and then stop a car on a cold street because a stranger's hands were moving through a child's hair and something in him remembered. He starts the car. He drives home. He goes to bed. He sleeps better than he has in months and does not examine why. The transitional housing unit on Clement Street is not luxurious. It is clean. It is warm. The heat works and has been confirmed to work by a building manager who received a call on Tuesday evening that adjusted his maintenance priorities significantly. The door has a working lock and the windows have working latches, and the unit is on the 3rd floor, which is not the safest floor but is safer than the ground floor and has a sightline to the street that Ayanna assessed within the first 10 minutes of arrival and found acceptable. She does not know the full shape of what happened between Tuesday evening and Thursday morning. She knows some of it. She knows that Sandra called. She knows that the Delancey shelter has new management. She knows that a woman named Patricia from the city's crisis response unit knocked on the shelter door Wednesday morning with a folder and a warm expression and a level of practical directness that was so different from every previous official interaction that Ayanna spent the first 10 minutes of the conversation waiting for the moment when it reverted to the familiar pattern. It did not revert. Patricia explained what had been found, as much as could be explained within the boundaries of an active investigation, and what was going to happen, and what resources were available, and asked Ayanna what she needed. Not what the protocol offered. What she needed. Ayanna had a list. She had been keeping the list in her head for 6 weeks, the things she would ask for if she ever found herself in a room with someone who was actually asking. She delivered it the same way she delivered everything, clearly and without embellishment. Safe housing, distance from Delancey Street, Cairo's school enrollment handled without further delays, a caseworker she could reach and who would call back. Patricia wrote all of it down. By Thursday afternoon they were in the unit on Clement Street. It smelled like fresh paint and the kind of industrial cleaner that suggests recent renovation. The carpet was not new, but it was clean. The kitchen had a working stove and a refrigerator that had been stocked with basics, the kind of stocking that suggested someone had done it deliberately and recently: eggs and bread and fruit and the specific brand of juice boxes that Cairo preferred, which was a detail so precise that Ayanna stood in front of the open refrigerator for a moment and thought about who would have known that detail and how and what it meant that they had acted on it. She closed the refrigerator. She decided to be grateful without requiring the full explanation. The full explanation could be examined later. Right now there were groceries and a working stove and a locked door and a child who needed dinner. She made dinner. Cairo ate with the focused satisfaction of a child whose body is receiving more than it has been getting and knows it even if he cannot articulate why. She bathed him. She read to him. She sat on the edge of the bed that was his and watched him fall asleep and felt the specific release of a parent watching a child's body receive the signal that it is safe to stop being vigilant. He was asleep in 11 minutes. Deep and immediate and complete. She braided her own hair in the kitchen, her hands needing the motion needing to go somewhere. The apartment was very quiet. Quiet in a way that shelter quiet never was, because shelter quiet was always provisional, always underlaid with the ambient sound of other families and thin walls and the possibility of interruption. This quiet was different. This quiet was just quiet. She was sitting with it, still working her hair, when there was a knock at the door. Quiet. Brief. Not urgent. She was still for a moment. She had been expecting various kinds of official follow-up and this was probably that. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Dominic Falcone. He was not in the expensive overcoat. He was in a regular jacket, dark, practical, his hands in his pockets. He looked like someone who was not entirely certain he should be there and had come anyway, which was such an unlikely quality for a man she had immediately understood to be someone who was always entirely certain about where he should be that it produced in her something that was almost amusement. She opened the door. He said, "I wanted to make sure the heat was working." She looked at him. She said, "It's working." He nodded. He looked like he was going to leave. He did not leave. She said, "Do you want to come in?" He said, "No. I just wanted to check." She said, the juice boxes were a specific brand. He was quiet for a moment. She said, "Cairo likes the grape ones, not the apple." Somebody knew that. He said, "I made some calls." She said, "You make a lot of calls." He said, "Yes." She looked at him in the hallway. A man who had appeared on shelter steps in 11-degree weather and sat down on unsalted stairs in a coat that cost more than her rent and listened to her for a long time without redirecting or managing or categorizing what she said. A man who had then, apparently, made calls that resulted in things she had been trying to make happen for 6 weeks happening in approximately 72 hours. She said, "Thank you." He started to say it was nothing and she watched him stop himself. She watched him choose something more honest. He said, "You were already protecting him. You had been protecting him for 6 weeks before I drove past." "I just made some calls." She said, "You listened." That was the part that mattered. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor of the hallway and then back at her. He said, "I know what it is to need someone to sit still and listen and have nobody do it." She looked at him. He did not elaborate. She did not ask him to. She said, "Good night, Mr. Falcone." He said, "Good night, Ms. Brooks." He turned and walked down the hall. She stood in the doorway and watched him go and thought about what kind of man he was and decided that the question was more complicated than most of the questions she usually answered and deserved more time than tonight. She went back inside. She locked the door. She stood in the kitchen of a warm room and finished braiding her hair and listened to the building be quiet around her and thought that quiet, real quiet, was something she had forgotten the texture of. She was going to learn it again. 3 months later. The morning light comes through the kitchen window at Clement Street at an angle that changes with the season and is currently doing something specific to the corner where Ayanna has put the small table, turning it a warm gold that Cairo has started calling breakfast sunshine, which is now what it is called, because when a 5-year-old names something it tends to stay named. Cairo starts school in 11 days. He has been ready for school in the logistical sense, the enrollment documents processed without delays, the school supplies acquired in a way that did not require Ayanna to manage the mathematics of prioritization, for 3 weeks. He is ready in the other sense too, the sense that matters more, the sense of a child who has slept well enough and eaten regularly enough and been safe enough long enough that the world has started to feel like a place that rewards curiosity rather than a place that requires constant vigilance. He is currently negotiating his hairstyle. He has decided he wants something different. He has been unable to specify what different means. He has been changing his mind approximately every 48 hours and Ayanna has been redoing the braids with the patience of a woman who understands that a child renegotiating the terms of something is a child who has enough security to care about preferences, which is a luxury she does not intend to take for granted. She is working on the 4th iteration of this week's style when he asks the question she has been waiting for him to ask. He says, "Who was that man?" At the shelter. The one from the car. She keeps working. Her hands stay steady. She says, "Someone who stopped." He processes this. He is a thorough processor. He does not rush conclusions. He says, "Why did he stop?" She thinks about a windshield and a pointed hand and unsalted steps and a man in an expensive coat sitting down on them without appearing to notice what they cost him. She thinks about a question asked directly and listened to completely and acted on without the 48 hours of procedural delay that had become the normal texture of her days. She thinks about grape juice boxes in a refrigerator and a knock at the door and a man who said, "I know what it is to need someone to sit still and listen and have nobody do it." She thinks about a mother who braided her son's hair while he slept so he would know she had been there even on the nights she was not there when he woke up. She says, "I think he remembered something." Cairo thinks about this. He says, "What did he remember?" She looks at the morning light on the table. She says, "Someone who was careful with him a long time ago." And how much it mattered. He is quiet for a moment. He says, "Is he going to come back?" She says, "I don't know, baby." He says, "I hope he does." She ties off the last braid. She smooths it down. She turns him around and looks at her son in the morning light and thinks about everything that had to happen for them to be in this kitchen on this morning with breakfast sunshine on the table and 11 days until school and a child who has enough safety now to have preferences about his hair. She thinks about the 6 weeks before the car stopped. The reports and the redirects and the callbacks that did not come and the mornings she braided his hair on shelter steps while the world moved past on the other side of the street with its hands in its pockets and its eyes forward. She was there the whole time. She was protecting him the whole time. She was steady and present and persistent and entirely invisible to every person and every system that should have been able to see her. She does not need Dominic Falcone to have saved her. He did not save her. She saved herself and her son for 6 weeks before his car ever slowed down. What he gave her was simpler and more important than rescue. He looked. He stopped. He sat down on cold steps and listened all the way to the end. That is the thing the story leaves in the air. The question without a clean answer. Not whether Dominic Falcone is a good man. The answer to that is too complicated for this morning and probably for most mornings. The question is whether stopping is enough. Whether pointing is enough. Whether sitting down and listening and making calls is enough when 6 weeks of not doing those things have already cost a woman and her son something they cannot get back. The question is what you owe the people you drive past. The question is whether you have already passed someone on cold steps who deserve to be looked at and kept driving. The question is what you are going to do the next time Lenny's hand goes up. Ayanna Brooks was always worth stopping for. She was there every morning. Steady hands. Quiet presence. creating care in the spaces where care had failed to arrive. She did not need the world to notice her to keep doing it. But the world should have noticed sooner. And the next time it passes someone like her on shelter steps in the cold, the only question that matters is a simple one. Are you going to point?